What is the difference between conditions precedent and conditions subsequent? Between conditions precedent and conditions subsequent, the differences are important and radical. In case of a condition precedent, as the obligation to perform the covenant or promise does not arise until the event happens, of course, until then, there can be no breach of the obligation, and hence no action can be brought. And when an action is brought, it is a necessary part of the plaintiff's case to allege and prove that the event has happened. In the case of a condition subsequent, on the other hand, as the obligation to perform the covenant or promises arises the moment that the latter is made, a breach of the obligation has no connection with the happening of the event and may take place either before or after the event happens. When an action is brought, therefore, the plaintiff can make out his case without any reference to the condition. And if in truth the event has happened and the defendant is in consequence not bound to perform his covenant or promise, the burden lies upon him to allege and prove that fact. A condition subsequent, therefore, is always a defense and an affirmative one. While the performance of the covenant or promise depends upon the happening of the event in both cases, it depends upon it in a different sense in the one case from what it does in the other. In the case of a condition precedent, the covenant or promise is not to be performed unless the event happens, while in the case of a condition subsequent, it is not to be performed if it happens. A condition precedent is an element in the creation of an obligation. A condition subsequent is one of the means by which an obligation is extinguished. When it is said that, in the case of a condition subsequent, the obligation to perform arises immediately upon the making of the condition or promise, it must not be inferred that performance is necessarily to take place immediately. An obligation may exist now to do a thing at a future time, and it may or may not be certain that that time will arrive, provided it be certain that will arrive sometime, and yet the performance of that obligation may be liable to be defeated by a condition subsequent. It is possible, therefore, for an obligation to be extinguished by a condition subsequent before the time for performing the obligation arrives, and hence before any right of action accrues. Yet if an action be brought after the time for performance arrives, the plaintiff will be able to state and prove facts which will entitle him to recover, unless the defendant sets up and proves his defense arising from the condition subsequent. Thank you.